谢谢 David Curran 先生跟我们分享一些在全球最新的互联网方面的一些热点。下面呢，我们有请新任的互联网框架体系，国际互联网框架体系组织叫 IAB 的主席Andrew Sullivan 给我们做关于未来网络基础架构的挑战和机遇的演讲。Andrew 最近也是非常忙，刚从伦敦完成一个会议，就到北京来跟我们分享一下在未来网络的整体框架当中的一些思考。那么下面我们有请 Andrew。
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in Beijing, learned professors, esteemed leaders, distinguished researchers, and ladies and gentlemen. I especially want to thank the organizers of this event, and Davey in particular, Davey Song, who was so helpful, and his staff in helping me to arrange my schedule to get here. As you may know, I was recently appointed the chair of the Internet Architecture Board, or IAB. The IAB sent me here with its greetings and with pretty serious instructions to listen carefully to the developments at this conference and to report back to them about the interesting developments going on here in China. The IAB usually speaks with one voice on the topics of Internet architecture, and it publishes its views as RFCs. Because this conference is about currently developing topics, of course, the IAB hasn't made up its mind about what's going to do. If you know anything about the IAB, it takes a long time for the IAB to make up its mind. In any case, we haven't come to a conclusion, and so today I will speak under personal title about things that I am observing. I am nevertheless extremely thankful to my colleagues on the IAB for our recent discussions. I'm going to reflect on some of those in my talk today. Ted Hardy, in particular, Ted Hardy is one of the IAB members. He gave me several useful lines of thought, and this topic came up at our recent retreat in London, England. What is good in what I have to say, therefore, of course, benefits from their observations, but what is bad in what I have to say is entirely my fault. Now, something that is tricky in talking about the Internet architecture or infrastructure is that the Internet is not one thing. It is a network of networks, of networks, of networks, and so on. This means that successive Internet infrastructure is different from normal networking infrastructure. A normal network, a network for a particular purpose, always has something in mind. That is, we can say, what is successful in a single network or across a single enterprise's set of networks might not be successful on the wider Internet. This is because in a single network, there is some particular goal or set of goals to be achieved. Because of the nature of the Internet, the only possible goal for Internet infrastructure must be interoperation. To the extent a future infrastructure promotes different systems to exchange packets, it contributes to that Internet and Internet interoperation. I'm going to call the vendor-agnostic interoperable approach the interoperation style, and the approach that works only among prearranged actors, the closed style. The difference between these styles is important because it is hard today to discern the way developments are headed. On the one hand, the Internet is quite obviously everywhere expanding. There is little reason to suppose that will change. Interconnection via the Internet seems everywhere and for everything easier and faster and cheaper and more reliable than all the alternatives. We heard only this morning a number of examples of how that is the case. The all but complete victory of packet networks over traditional circuit switching looks like evidence that the internet is simply bound to win out over everything else. Therefore, whatever network topologies become the future internet infrastructure, interoperation ought to win. And yet, there are currents flowing in the opposite direction. In the application layer, services are increasingly built atop private APIs controlled by one company or organization. This development is, in one sense, an expansion of the internet. All of these kinds of applications rely on the internet. They sit on top of it. But they have a different quality to older developments. It used to be that a new addition to the network that implemented a new protocol automatically added to the functionality of everyone else. When I added an XMPP client to the network, I increased the utility of XMPP for everybody else on the internet, if they wanted to use it or if they were already using it. But when I join a social media service, that is not really an addition to the internet as such. It's an addition to that service. Many people do not think of this as really part of the infrastructure, but I don't think this is correct. We think of email, for instance, as part of the internet infrastructure. We always have. Many people argue that it would not be possible to have the internet at all if it hadn't been for the invention of email. It was the original killer app. If email is part of the internet infrastructure, then other communication methods that people are using every day must be part of that infrastructure as well. Certainly these services are an important part of the way people communicate and the platform that many businesses use to talk to their customers. But they're only kind of on the internet. If you haven't joined the service, you haven't agreed to the terms and conditions, you haven't installed the app on your phone or whatever, then you can't use that service. It's not just a basic part of the internet. Now in these cases, the commercial pressures push against opening the service up. If you are operating a successful closed style of service, there are very few apparent reasons to make it into an interoperation style service and lots of commercial reasons not to. Your revenue might depend on keeping it closed. Your competitors might take away your customers and so on. So you're going to try to keep it closed. This means at least the intercommunication infrastructure we have on the internet may be in trouble. I don't know what it's like here in China right now, but email in the country that I come from is now no longer very popular among young people. For people my age, of course, it's important, but young people use it primarily as a bootstrap mechanism to get another service going, or else to communicate with their parents and grandparents. But they don't talk to one another via email. It's not critical infrastructure to them anymore. Now, perhaps because of my background, I am inclined to have a very generous interpretation of what to call infrastructure. I want to include anything with wide ubiquity on which everyone depends. That means that application layer things all count. If it makes the news when it goes down, I think it's infrastructure. So a big website, a big social media network, a microblogging platform that everybody uses, they're all infrastructure. But not everybody agrees. Some people think that this isn't really infrastructure, that those are just services and we should talk about the low layer things. So we can be narrow. Let's interpret infrastructure as only those things below the application layer. We heard about some of them today. We were talking about them. Well, this brings us to the issues of software-defined networking. And in my view, SDN brings both opportunities and risk to the internet and the health of the internet infrastructure. I think the future of the internet is bright, so I'm going to start with the risk. I'll get to the opportunity in a minute. Now, the risk is easy to describe. If you are a network operator, obviously, you want to control flows through your networks. In the most basic terms, you need to balance traffic among the resources you have. You don't want to overload a busy path when an unloaded one is available. You don't want expensive transit links when you can use an inexpensive one, or better yet, a free peer. Of course, that free peering might have perverse effects on the network, but that's good for you, so who cares? These are basic issues. Every network operator has had these forever. There's nothing new about them. We have solutions. Some of them work better than others. But all of this regards the network as a pure substrate and things sitting on top of it. That's the way the network services grew up. Of course, it worked, but it makes it hard to deploy these things. And that's, of course, the story that everybody tells about software-defined networking when they want to talk about it, right? Easy to deploy, agile, all of the usual stories about it. But all of this means that networks want to use more than just the destination in order to make decisions about how the traffic is going to flow. And as David said only a moment ago, probably the Internet of Things means that we're not going to have any choice in the matter, because it's just not possible to do everything according to the destination. Of course, we also know that many of the important network operators are also the people who are deploying the most interesting services. So this turn to SDN is hardly any surprise. It's natural to separate the control plane and the data plane and then start making decisions. And that's all great, except that you can only control those things within the common control plane. So the issue is that these approaches work extremely well within a single network. They even work well within a single operator's context. Sometimes it works between operators, but that's only because they've set up some private agreements between them. They have a private channel of some sort. The basic intranetworking infrastructure, the network of networks, it still only relies on those destinations. The routing system works that way. The naming system, the identifier system that we have, also provides us essentially only that kind of data. We have only destination information, not much else that will affect flows. And it seems there's no interoperable way to do more than that without a great deal more work. That work has only just started, and maybe it won't succeed. So we have an enormous opportunity, but it has in the way this enormous challenge of standardizing these things. We know that SDN is getting widely deployed within networks to considerable advantage. And the same arguments about agility, flexibility, lower costs, lower operating costs, and lower capital costs, these all ought to apply within the context of the global internet. So there are reasons for us to press for SDN-style features for internetworking. At the same time, the commercial development on the internet appears to be focused on vertical control. Winner-takes-all types of service develop, closing the users into a single vendor ecosystem in which it is not the internet, but only the vendor's service that one gets access to. This preference for closed-style services is present not only in the application layer. Lock-in and private agreements have a commercial logic about them, and that leaves open the question of whether there will be interest in developing SDN techniques for the real internet. Now, I mentioned DNS a moment ago and how it provides mostly just destination information. But there's another thing about the DNS that I want to draw attention to because it provides maybe a way forward. I know you wouldn't have thought that the DNS could be another way forward, but it can be. SDN techniques that we see so far generally rely on the separation of the data plane and the control plane. That's been what we've seen. If one doesn't follow that strategy, however, there may be other opportunities available to us. And an interesting thing about the DNS, an interesting lesson we can get from it, is that it has never separated its control plane and data plane. That is, the control plane data, SOA records, NS records, DNS keys, and so on, they're all just more data. They're part of the same data stream. If you want to add a new feature to the DNS, you add another data type. We even added new headers to the DNS by adding another data type. There is a power to that approach. And the power is that for the most part, it is completely backwards compatible. David is smiling at me because he knows the contrary story. But it is, in theory, completely backwards compatible. There are still broken systems on the internet that react badly to DNS data that they weren't prepared to accept. Nevertheless, for the most part, correctly functioning systems can all deal with unknown data types. They work. This means that the path to deployment for innovations is not to completely deploy a new thing. Instead, it allows us just to add new data to influence flows between networks, and that might be helpful to aid incremental deployment. If we use such techniques, we might find it easier to deploy features for internetworking that can affect flows on the basis of more than just destination between networks without prior coordination in exactly the way that the internet works today. Now, why am I so worried about this incremental deployability? Well, incremental deployability turns out to be absolutely critical for any future internet infrastructure. Within a given network, or within a given organization's set of networks, incremental deployability might not be a primary value. The particular goals of the organization might make it worth the trade-off. Even if it's expensive and inconvenient, it might still be worth it anyway. I know that in my own company, we sometimes make technical decisions that can be very disruptive to our existing deployments. We think that the ultimate goal in those cases is worth the cost. And because we control the entire system, we can make that decision. I'm sure you all have examples of this that you can think of in your own organizations as well. But internet infrastructure doesn't work that way. For the most part on the internet, a feature is really only useful if it is widely deployed. And only rarely will it get widely deployed if the first few deployers do not get immediate benefit from using the feature. If 10 networks deploy some new bit of functionality and that functionality does not harm anyone else, and the 10 networks get something valuable from the new functionality, then there are pretty good prospects for the 11th and 12th and 13th and millionth deployer to come along. Each additional network in that case that adds it can get the incremental benefit right away. And as long as the benefit is worth more than the cost of deployment, we can expect to see the virtuous circle of wide adoption. If, however, the feature or protocol is costly to those networks who have not deployed it, or if it does not immediately benefit the deployer, and this is critical, then the prospects for such deployment are much worse. This is all described in an RFC 5218. The principles there apply as much to controlling internet flows on the basis of more than just destination, just as much as they apply to all of the other cases. And there are a number of case studies in that RFC that outline how this works. It's extremely compelling, and if you read it, I'm sure you will think of another one because it's so intuitive once you see it. So this is a risk not for the internet exactly, but for SDN style deployment on the internet. That is, we could come up with techniques that simply do not get deployed between and among networks because the incentives are wrong. If that happens, we won't get deployment. This is, in fact, the story of BCP 38 that David mentioned in his previous talk. It hasn't been deployed because people don't get a benefit from it. Everybody else gets the benefit, and I pay the cost. Why would I do that? Now, all is not gloomy. I said earlier that I would end with the opportunity, and so here it is. Service function chaining is described, or the problem statement for it is described in RFC 7498. And as that effort becomes standardized and the issues become better understood, we have the chance to remake our understanding of how and why packets flow between networks. This is a long-term project, but I agree with David that the long-term position here is just going to have to be an increased intelligence among the various endpoints. We can achieve flow controls based on more complete information about service functions and service topologies. Good service classification will allow not only simpler and less ossified networks, the move to the champagne glass that we heard earlier. The gradual move away from IPv4 also becomes easier this way, because the features become available to make intelligent decisions about flows and how to support older technologies in the few cases where they're really necessary. But we will only get these benefits if we continue to focus on the interoperable style of networking. We cannot focus on a closed style, because if we do, we won't actually get the internet at all. I hope that you will join me and the rest of the standards community in building that future happy internet that continues to work for everyone. I thank you very much for your attention today, and I look forward to our discussions during the rest of this conference. Thank you.